Hello.
Hello. Hello. Hey, Alex. Hey, Cherise.
Hello.
Hello. Kenya. Waiting for a couple people. I just got an email from one of the jurors who was having trouble getting into the link. I'm waiting for him. Hi, Sean. Matt. Hey, Gregory, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Excited.
Excited?
Yeah.
That's good. It's Sunday morning on Zoom.
Yeah.
Jermaine's here, and we're waiting for Lisa. And look at your face after 45 days of quarantine.
Hey, what's up, Sean?
Hey, what's up? How's it going, Jermaine?
Oh, you guys know each other? Okay. I don't know who knows.
Formally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, great. So
How's the weather out there, Mark?
I'm in my backyard. It's like 70 something right now.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
pretty
good.
nice.
It was 98 last weekend, so it's a little nicer now. Just trying to open up. Just immediately right before this talk, I had to restart my computer because my camera wasn't working. So going, just gotta pull up a document.
You look like you're in a flashback of a Tarantino movie.
Yeah, actually, that's actually where. Oh man, well, yeah, that could be problematic. Just trying to open the thing.
Were you on any yesterday?
Yeah, we had 3 reviews yesterday. We had the first half of our students present yesterday, and then the second half is today.
Gotcha.
So just waiting for Lisa Little. We'll give her a minute to catch up here. And that's it.
Okay.
So let's start with that.
Yeah. See what you can do.
Okay. Oh, and there's Lisa. Good. Hi, Lisa. All right, so I think everybody is here. Lisa, there's Lisa. Okay, good. Well, the ideal way to spend a Sunday in quarantine, but hopefully you'll enjoy it somewhat. We had our first review yesterday. It was really fun, and we're live streaming it so the parents can tune in and watch the review. We've got a helicopter flying over LA. I live right next to LAPD, the training academy, so sort of inevitable. In any event, so I'm going to introduce the jury. I've introduced all the jury to the students in advance so that they would know a little bit about you. So I don't have to take a lot of your time. Former classmate of mine from SciArc. Actually, I have 2 classmates from SciArc here. Lisa Little also. So Lisa, Alex, and I all graduated from SciArc.
Hi, Alex.
Lisa?
Just a few years ago. Just a few years ago.
In a while.
Yesterday.
And Lisa's at USC. Lisa's at USC. And then coming down here, we have Jermaine Barnes, former Woodbury student, alumni, and now at
Hey.
University of Miami, in Miami. And then we have Sean Canty, who I basically cold called and invited to the review, and he said yes. This is our first time we're meeting, and I'm excited to have him on the review. And he's at Harvard, the GSD, so it's really great to have him. And there's Lisa, and then Gregory Zamora, who runs the PCC architecture program. So a lot of really wonderful students are coming out of there and going to all over LA's architecture program after they finish 2 years at PCC. So there are a lot of them. Any of our students here on this review? Not okay, not today. So that's it. So I'm gonna share my screen for a second just to give an introduction. I'm just gonna use the website to kind of just to talk about the course. So everybody can see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, the studio is called Offsets, and it's a year-long project. So this is the 5th year undergraduate degree project at Woodbury University. So these students are all graduating. In the fall, they took a seminar of research, and in the spring, they do a studio, much like they do at USC when Lisa's teaching. So the studio is called Offset. So basically thought about this on a couple levels. The first level is a very simple geometric thing, which is that when you offset a rectangle, so like this rectangle on your left, you end up with a different shape, right? Because what happens is that rectangle is offset an equal distance perpendicular to itself. So it produces a shape that, although originating from the parent shape, is different proportionally to the original. To produce a proportional offset, you actually, just like if you were cutting a section through a pyramid, it must be scaled along the diagonals, right? So it's a different kind of thing. So the idea here, and this is the same with isosceles triangle, equilateral triangle. The only shapes like circles and squares, if you offset proportionally or offset any other equally, they produce the same shape. But these 3 shapes are always different. So the kind of idea was that, when offsetting, when producing wall thickness in architecture, inevitably the interior and the exterior are different, even if the intention is to maintain similarity. So building on that, if we go into the website here, I'm going to read these quotes too. So this is from Alberti, which, if, as the philosophers maintain, the city is like some large house, and the house, atria, zisti, dining rooms, porticos, and so on, be considered miniature buildings. I think that quote's really provocative. I don't think a lot of Alberti is super provocative, but I like that idea that the interior, the building inside of the thing itself, is actually its own building. It can be considered like a city inside of a building. And then the Venturi quote: since the inside is different from the outside, the wall, the point of change, becomes an architectural event. So really a provocation for the students to think about, on the one hand, interior space as the kind of generator of architectural form, and 2, the wall as a kind of significant moment. And then I'm just going to read the little synopsis. The studio formally analyzed the geometric and formal differences between the interior and exterior lines of the wall. Students began by collecting a large set of building plans and sections and cataloging them. From this catalog, students selected a single precedent and built a computational model project based on analysis of its formative geometry. Through this analysis, students structured a drawing methodology for the production of interior and exterior form as a set of interrelated but distinct objects. Following from Alberti's description of the house, students proposed a program of either house or housing. In either case, central to their work was the integration of the means by which space is subdivided, nested, or otherwise accumulated within the object of architecture. While all students began with Alberti's prompt of building within buildings, each student's project is based on a distinct methodology of offsetting derived from historical research. So Aaron is here now too. Aaron Garrett. Hi, Aaron. Aaron? You here? Okay, so I admitted Aaron. I'm just going to keep going through the presentation, and Aaron was on our midterm, so I think she can follow through. Run through the projects here just quickly, not all of them. I'm just going to kind of show the different students looked at and take different precedents and analyze them, and then develop the kind of. So this project had to deal with volume and line. This is from yesterday. I'm just going to kind of scan through them, really not get into them. This is another project that began by looking at Armenian century. And then this project surrounded Dodger Stadium, actually. Yesterday. This project began by looking at Aachen Cathedral and looked at the relationship between analogous polygons. This also presented yesterday. This is going to be today. This is Kenya's project. This is a project that began with the Baths of Diocletian and looked at the importance of the wall and the complexity of the wall. So this is a project about the city of walls. Lucas Mock. This animation always takes a little long to load. And I did, Lucas, it is 5 megabytes now. I downsized it anyway before he sent it to me. It's just still, seems like 5 megabytes is too big. I got that or spaces that are oriented otherwise, looking at the interior. And he began by looking at Otto Wagner's Austrian Postal Savings Bank. Max Perez looked at the Houses of Parliament in London and looked at the orientation, the axes, the corridor, as it kind of means you're starting to think about architecture. Cherise Sabatsian also looked at Otto Wagner, and she looked at the kind of subsidiary spaces surrounding the kind of primary spaces as the primary focus of architecture. Armand, who presented yesterday, looked at Iranian domestic and religious architecture and kind of undermined the way we start to think about program and organization of space. Jeremiah also presented, he looked at a drawing of Louis Kahn of Castle and made a project that was centered on the production of what he called absolute voids. Figures, this is Nicholas Guerna. He looked at the figures that are left over from centrally planned architecture as they meet the city. He presented yesterday. And this is Yixi Song. So that's it. And I'm going to unshare this project, unshare screen. Okay. So just a heads up, the schedule is slightly different than what I sent to you guys when I sent the initial invitation. So what I'm going to do is in the chat box prior to every review, I'm just going to post a link, and you should just be able to click on the link and go. You don't have to log in or create an account. You should just be able to follow the link right through. We had some trouble on the first review yesterday, so I'm just going to give everyone a second to follow the link and make sure we get there. So we're going to start with Cherise, and I'm going to paste the link into the chat right now. Okay, so there's the chat. So Erin Gensler has just joined us. She's a faculty at Woodbury University. She's teaching the second year studio. She was at our midterm review, so she has some. At least it was also at the midterm review. So they have some kind of continuity with some of the work. So is everyone able to find that link? So just a heads up. And so the student can't play them on your screen. You'll have to click on them and play them yourself, just so they won't automatically play. Just so you're aware. So Cherise, you can go ahead and take control, and we're going to go about 25 minutes each person. Okay.
All right. Hello, my name is Cherise Shabazian, and my thesis title is Subsidiary Cusps. This project produces a set of subsidiary spaces whose role is to absorb the difference between the two divergent systems. So I analyzed the Landon Bank in my research by Otto Wagner. In this plan, the building and the main hall is defined by two distinct axes that are resolved through large centrally planned spaces. The perimeter of these domes and grid lines of the tangent edges produces a set of ancillary residual spaces. These complex spaces differ tremendously from the orderly nature of the grids and the centrally planned spaces they were revived from. So here's my primary geometries that house the main program of the trying out like different ways of forming these residual spaces. So the one I went with was this solid rectangular cube that had like these spheres subtracted out of it, where the cube with the subtractions therefore became the residual spaces. So this project is located in a dense urban setting of downtown LA. The site was chosen due to the shifting grids of organization, which then influenced the interior spaces from an urban level. The building's exterior is a simple extrusion of the site boundary, and the first level of residual spaces are formed through the subtraction of centrally planned ellipses, creating the secondary program of arboretums at all of the four corners of the site boundary, forming a communal space that brings the residents of the dense urban surrounding into the public green spaces. These residual subtractions and urban site boundaries then become the driving force in which housing forms get developed. The housing units are formed by vaulting radially along the radii of the two opposing arboretums. The radial vaulting spans through the floors, creating ramps for circulation, and also extends to the exterior envelope where the interior form influences the apertures on the outside. This produces a complex groin vault system within the massing of the residual form around the subtracted area. The steel and panel groin vaulting system allows the development of variously sized units and rooms. And also, as you move up in the building, the vaulting system becomes thinner as the load decreases. You can see the vaulting system here. And the rooms for the units are normally divided up in groups of 9. So as the groin vaults intersect each other, they make these kind of shifted squares. So that that's used to divide the rooms. Some rooms are larger and some rooms are bigger that have less rooms. So yeah, just to conclude, the residual spaces of architecture is the most compelling and important. This project produces this idea of programmatic hierarchy in which different spaces of subsidiary cusps act upon each other through the urban scale, a public scale, and an individual unit scale, all acting upon one another to create congruence between two tremendously different types of program. I also have the 2 animations right here.
Cherise, can you go back to the floor plans, please? And zoom in on the housing units.
Do you think it'll be helpful if I stop moderating so everyone could just like?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, you can stop moderating and you have to stop. There you go. Then everyone can move around.
Okay. So, well, first I want to start with the representation is beautiful. I think the drawings are stunning. I'm a big fan of sort of the genesis all the way into the exodus of the project and the way that you've been able to abstract these moments from Wagner's original floor plan. Part of the project I'm sort of struggling with, however, is this articulation of the interior housing units, particularly because there are moments where you have these super thick walls or super thick ceilings that I would have liked to see you interrogate those as spaces of habitation beyond just the space in between that's the traditional sort of unit space, right? So there's a lot of moments where you have a lot of this excess wall thickness that perhaps you can start to hide additional program. That it would have been nice to see how that manifests inside of the wall. So then when you look at the axonometric from the worm's eye view, we can start to see what happens within those spaces when they are placed adjacent to those vaults, right? In those larger geometries. I think those are moments where you can have quite a bit of interesting mashing of program and structure, which is sort of a large portion of the point of the assignment, especially with this idea of the offset and what happens within those walls when these lines get offset within them, like what happens between that interstitial space. So I think those are moments where I would, if you continue going forward, I think you should, what happens within those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the actual sections that you've created, which again are absolutely
really beautiful presentation and sets of drawings. And in particular, I really like the section and how you thought about the ways in which the poche is variable from top to bottom. And I'll return to that in a bit, but I want to maybe return to your analysis in terms of how the subsidiary spaces are formed between tangent figures or tangent volumes in plan. And maybe building on Jermaine's some of Jermaine's points, I'm wondering if the radial vaulting could, if there could be maybe degrees of resolution to that, and so maybe if I can explain a little bit, is that the offset produces the grain, and then within that grain is subdivided to produce the housing units. But everything kind of gets subsumed or absorbed into the radial system. And I was wondering if there was an opportunity of thinking about bringing the tangency back, in which there's maybe a more of a oppositional relationship between the continuous and discrete. So the offset lines produces the grain of continuity of the vaults, but a series of tangent lines that pull off of, let's say, the elliptic lines in plan could allow for discrete rooms, more orthogonal discrete rooms that maybe aren't curved, but more kind of a low-res version of the offset. Well, might produce rooms that maybe have better maybe plan organizations, but also would then proliferate this in-between spaces. So between every tangent line, if there's an orthogonal volume that is the room, will always be a wedged figure of space that you could then pack services or some other, or circulation or things like that. So in some ways, you're kind of inverting the precedent in that suggestion, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity to think about the relationship between the room and the larger ellipsoid, the larger circular figures in the plan. Also, when you move, maybe when you're closer to the figure of the courtyards or the atria, that the rooms are they maintain their radial logic because they're all pointing towards a collective center. So I do like that part as much, but when it begins to kind of move towards the periphery, you might instantiate this idea of more of a discrete, low-res version of the offset as you move to the edges away from the centralized figures in the plan. But really beautiful project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that this is, like the other jurors have said, is a spectacular project. I think any institution would be proud to have it produced within their walls. But it does feel to me that a lot of the concept behind the geometric organizations are really kind of tying into the studio idea of concept, and it's not really drawing much from the Wagner piece as except for perhaps maybe the site selection. But the kind of the the idea of the grid is, and the conflicting grids aren't quite as legible as they could be. And to a certain degree, that the radial structure feels really homogeneous after a point, and it feels like you could bring in a level of discretion and intricacy by actually introducing opportunities to have a secondary formal logic introduced within it that could be derived from the Wagner piece as well. But beautiful project. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think one thing to comment on, based on partly on what Alex was just saying, is I like a lot of the ideas in the project. I think the two selected two selected program ideas are really strong to combine together, particularly in a radial format. The thing I was really interested in when you presented was this idea that the height of the vaulting is dialed into the thickness and the structure overall. And so, but I'm looking, for example, in the section and the sort of cut axon, and I'm not sure I'm fully following. I guess I'm not seeing what I was hoping to see in that regard. Like it seems to me that there could be more emphasis or more, just more pulled from that idea that the structure and the radius and height of each vault could manifest in the exterior of the building and in the poche of the roof line itself. I might be missing it, and it's happening somewhere and I'm just not seeing it, but I'm looking in the section and the section axon.
Are you talking about how it affects the exterior of the building, or how it varies as you go up?
I guess when I heard you talk about it, I was sort of visualizing two things: that it would affect the exterior of the building because it would affect the poche on the interior, but that would also register on the exterior, and then also that it might manifest itself in the plan itself. So, a sort of registration of that somehow in the housing portion.
I think where it shows most clearly structurally would be in the worm's eye view of the thickening, but again, that's like a middle chunk and it doesn't reach the exterior where it's taken from.
Yeah, I mean, I love those worm's eye, because it reminds me of some of the Swazi worm's eye axons. And I think maybe to reframe a little bit of my earlier comment, the worm's eye axon really shows the ways in which the units are maybe produced as a field condition, and maybe by bringing in that middle scale of maybe tangential discretization of the curve could allow for there to be more of a hybrid between a figure and a field. I'm thinking of a little bit of like Michael Malton's Carver apartments in LA, where the curve is assimilated through a series of wedged or pie-shaped rooms, and the spaces in between the rooms occasionally are decks or allows for slots of light. But there's a clear relationship between the part and a whole. But right now, I think the parts are really subsumed in a whole in your project, but I think there could be a nice maybe balance or play between those two.
Cherise, I have a question for you.
Yes.
When you created your process to abstract these rooms, invert them, and then have the offset happen, which resulted in your vaults, was that only in the X and Y direction and not in the Z direction? Because I'm looking back at the section, and the floor plates of the section seem very banal, like extremely standard, whereas everything else seems to be driven by your process. Like the floors just seem like it was just an afterthought. Is that?
Yeah. The vaulting did happen just around two of the arboretums, which were just X and Y to keep it like kind of clean. Because I do have, you could kind of see them in the section. the ones that kind of span the floors, I dash them in too
Hmm.
to see how they look. And when I tried to do that around multiple arboretums, it kind of got too messy and things would intersect incorrectly and it wouldn't just like work out logistically. So I did kind of have to clean it up, and I do agree that it kind of made it the floor plates look more systematic. But
Yeah, because
that's just
there's moments where because of the secondary program you chose, well, I'll let you tell me if the arboretum is primary or if it's secondary, if the housing is primary or secondary. Which one is the primary program?
the primary would be housing
Okay,
because
so got it. So with the arboretum as the secondary program, I would just assume that some of those floor plates would react to that program, right? And know that there's certain floor depths that we would need for said trees, whatever that are being grown within the actual space beyond the typical slab which goes across, right? And just thinking like how can your process, how can your iterative process create unique moments within the actual floor plate that facilitates certain locations where the trees go so that it doesn't seem like the trees are randomly placed.
Mhm.
They have to be in specific locations because of the generative process that you've created.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what sort of Jermaine and Alex sort of hit on is that there is like almost a need for a secondary logic placed back onto the system after you kind of created this beautiful, like pristine set of drawings. Is like, how does the reality start to affect what this project means? So is it the depth of the trees, and so they go wherever there's a thicker column, or is it like the light and how you get light into the trees? I think it's a really rich program to be playing with. So how do you start to use that to influence how you move forward with the project? I think there's so much here that is really exciting. The one thing that starts to really like irk me is the very simple elevator shafts. I think that there's an opportunity for you to really start to play with how that would actually work within your system.
Mhm.
And instead of like, or if it was more really the epicenter of where these two different like systems are working, and how do you start to breed them to make something more in line with what your logics are.
The elevator shafts actually derived from like one of my original diagrams. This one, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This one's the one I moved forward with. And previously I took out those extra subtracted circles out of the larger circles just because it was too much when subtracting it from the massing. And then I decided to reintroduce them to provide a separate circulation for the public throughout the arboretums and the private residents so they don't like always collide with each other.
I mean, I wonder if there is an opportunity to think about maybe to think about how the two arboretums could be slightly different from each other. In some ways, they're working in the same. So you use the ellipsoid, and I think it's more evident in the section that the ellipsoid allows for the scale and growth of the plan. So it diminishes slightly at the top, and then it widens at the bottom for more footprint. But maybe if, let's say, versus an ellipsoid, it was I'm just going to say I'm going to use an extruded ellipse, or one was an extruded ellipse and one was the ellipsoid, right? So you had a section that was more consistent on one of the arboretums and one that was scaling and growing in plan, which I think would affect the way in which you think about circulation within or around those figures, but also how might that maybe produce a kind of productive difference in the plans from one side of the project to the other, or even a conical ellipse, right, which gives the same effect but doesn't really. It's really not about double curvature. It's more about single curvature. But I think that's another way of maybe unsettling the section a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cherise, I think the project, I'm just thinking hearing some people's discussions, and it reminds me, and we haven't talked about this, but the Thomas Pynchon novel about Mason and Dixon, which is basically a fictitious retelling, a historical fiction of the the drawing of the Mason-Dixon line, which was described in a treatise by the king, but it was geometrically impossible. So they had to send the royal astronomers over to survey this line, and the line actually resulted in right around Delaware and Pennsylvania, and it produced this cusp of space that was in, and this is prior to the United States. This is English, so when it's still part of England, an English colony, and so it produced a subsidiary cusp, a little piece of space that was in no territory, right? It was completely removed from everything, and so I think what that makes me think about is that the fact that Thomas Pynchon wrote a 700-page novel about that subsidiary cusp, right? It's a compelling problem. It's an exciting and provocative idea, and I think you've been really exploring it super well this semester through tons of drawings. Looking at the plans, I'm listening to the comments today. When I look at all of the drawings, like the newer drawings, the plan of level 1 seems to really start to kind of deal with some of the conflicts and overlaps of these different cusps in the most compelling way. I think that one is the one that really starts to open up new territories for thinking about how these geometric elements can be both resolved and not resolved. And then I also like the comment, I think it was from Jermaine, about like if we think about the subsidiary cusp in Thomas Pynchon's novel, he speculates what could happen in this territory if it's not governed by anyone. Anything could go there. All the criminals could just hide there, like it's like this space. And so, what do you do with this poche then? These subsidiary spaces. How do you occupy them with other kinds of programs or things within those spaces or secret corridors? But I think anyway, super provocative topic, a really interesting set of drawings and really beautiful set of drawings. So congratulations. It's been a real pleasure working with you, Cherise.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Beautiful project.
Thank you.
Mark, I have a technical question on driving the boards. Is it whoever's speaking is driving the board? Is that how it's working?
I think he's frozen.
Uh-oh. Does anyone else have an answer to that?
I've used it before. It depends. So sometimes when the moderator is active, we can't do anything until the moderator.
I was muted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. So the students are going to moderate for the first part of the review, and then once they turn it over, then anyone else can then watch and move the board alone. So Max will take moderation now, and then he'll present his project, and after that, he'll turn it over to us, and then we can move around the boards independently.
Right, but my question is like it's jumping all over. It's jumping all over the place for me, as if someone else or everyone else is in charge of it except for me. And so I'm wondering if it's whoever's speaking is in charge of it, or how. It seems strange.
They have to. So if someone takes moderation, so Max will have moderation now. If you try to move it yourself, it will bounce back to whoever Max has it. So you actually have to. But when he releases it, it should not move at all anymore.
Is anyone else having that problem? Because once Cherise released it, I still couldn't really control it. So it was just going.
Yeah, you still have to go to sometimes you still have to go to the top right-hand corner, and then there's like a little
leave moderation.
Leave.
Yeah, you have to click it. Yeah, you got to click that. There's a button.
We have to leave as well.
Yeah, we also do.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Lisa. We're all learning how to do this on online education. And yeah, anyway, thank you for the question, because I think it's so. Is everybody at Max's board now?
No, I
Okay.
don't. Hold on.
All right. We good now? Everybody's on here? Okay. All right. Max, take it away.
Okay. Good morning, jurors. My name is Max Perez, and my thesis is Cities Within Buildings. The city is composed of competing interests, epochs, and regimes tied to the geometries of its grids. But now the city has entered the building. What was once the hectic grid of the city has become the interior. Landmarks, grids, boulevards, and buildings are projected deep into the building's core. The outside is only the beginning. As the interior is defined, so is its scale and angle in relation to the face of the building. Each penetrating disruption is influenced by landmarks that are in reference to the building's site. As each disruption occurs, so does it occur in elevation. The exterior of the building is a plain statement of site's geometric boundaries. The interior is a complex set of intersecting bodies and figures. Material conditions are translated to obscure geometric imprints. Apertures connect rooms to distant and seemingly irrelevant axes. Circulation is far from efficient, and there is no dominant grid. The city is a building, the building is a city. So to begin, the very beginning of the process, we had to choose a category and create a category. So the category I ended up choosing and creating was off-axis. Within that, I chose 5 precedents, the main one being the House of Parliament, that I then dived and delved into. So the drawing to the left would be the dissection and just trying to figure out the difference between the negative space and the positive space, and why there's 3 right angles and there's this 10-degree shift in the top axis. It was very provocative to me. I was thinking that maybe within the idea of the offset, these negative spaces can grow while intersecting and not just acting as a structural piece anymore, but as an actual positive space within the positive space. So that intersection creating that point. So the drawing to the right is what you see. You'll see a portion of what is the positive space, which is the darker, more heavier blue. And behind it, as the transparency starts to diminish, the negative spaces intersect, and through these intersections show how possibly they can speak to one another, I guess you would say, and what occurs, what can occur within that space. So moving forward, to mess with the idea of intersection and axis, and just trying to see what would occur, I had to choose a site. My site was in downtown LA off of Cesar Y. Chavez and North Main Street. And what I ended up depicting was the reason why the House of Parliament had that angle, that 10-degree shift, is because it was in correlation to what was occurring within the city. It was an entering piece for it, as you would say. And so what I ended up doing is I took these rudimentary shapes and I started taking landmarks that were in reference to it. And those references started to influence these negative spaces, now intersecting these whole rudimentary shapes, creating unique and different spaces within inside, while maintaining the same geometry, the simple geometric geometry on the outside. So I went through different phases. The first one being the deduction of space. So seeing the intersections taken away, subtracting from that geometry. The second one being those the negative space now intersecting one another and creating a unique space within itself, while at the end of the day still influencing the outside in some way. And then the third one was the sphere with these intersections that are occurring, reducing at certain certain scales and elevations. And again, all based within that axis, those landmarks, those being the most important to this. So what I ended up doing is, originally I chose Dodger Stadium, City Hall, and Union Station, and where I started to try to break it down into these categories. So just like what we did with the original precedents, I broke down in categories, different buildings, 3 buildings within 3 categories. The categories were civil, infrastructural, and cultural. What I felt would be most important and more unique was the influence of Union Station being a part of that process of projecting, and now the intersection being a projection onto the site, City Hall and Kaiser Hospital, which is up on the hill close by to Dodger Stadium. What did that begin to do is it started projecting through plan within it. So the exterior, what I ended up doing is the exterior of the shell was trying to call out the points of intersection on the outer rim of that projection. However, what I ended up doing is I switched it up and I went with the site itself, being that the shell. I'm projecting these landmarks into the site. The site, the boundary of the site should be that casing. So what I ended up doing is I projected onto both the exterior shell and the interior buildings. And what this did is that it allowed for these moments of openings, one, and two, it gave this encasement. My program for the housing facility was for veterans. So I knew that me being a veteran myself, that if I wanted a sanctuary space for homeless veterans in particular, people who are dealing with drug addiction, alcoholism, just have had all types of wrongs happen in their lives, and are trying to recover, what would I want? What would I want as a veteran if I was in their shoes? So what I did is I created a sanctuary space. That's what that exterior shell acts as well. And as you enter the site, what occurs is, as I said, those projections, these being the projection lines for the shell from Kaiser, City Hall, and Union Station, and the same influence occurring through the buildings. And now the projections now creating the landscape, the soft and hardscape for this environment, and bring differential moment between these projected intersecting lines. And it's just following the same language as did the House of Parliament, where this subtle axis shift then created this experiential moment within a building. So do these subtle axis shifts through projections and intersections create these unique and telling experiential moments within the site itself and within the plans themselves. And just to reiterate again, the last statement being to my abstract was, the city is a building, the building becomes a city.
Max, just a quick point of clarification. Can you run for me just one more time? I'm looking on the sheet that has the 4 volumes it's adjacent. Yeah, cool. You see me. Walk me through one more time how these 4 extrusions become the larger volume that's on the right.
As far as the interior shells or the exterior?
Exterior shell.
So the exterior was based off of, and I'll take you over to the plan if you come over here to the diagrammatic plan. So the shell, and I have it kind of silhouetted out, the heavy black line kind of, so each point to that silhouette then created that kind of shell.
But are there like points of intersection or something? Because a lot of the geometries like Union Station, City Hall, and and Kaiser, none of them have such jagged edges as say this point that you have here.
So when I projected these I apologize. I mean, good job. But when I projected these profiles of these buildings onto the site, what cut it off and what took away and possibly created these jagged edges that you see is the site, that site boundary. And from there, that's when I wanted to and thought of taking the exterior shell, making it unique within its own right. But ultimately, it just detracting from what was already happening inside.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Max. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Talk about this subtle shift, but what is the subtleness of the shift? What are you shifting against?
What am I shifting against?
Yeah, what is like the subtle shift against?
The subtle shift is against what already is the city grid. So the streets, the buildings that are surrounding inside the context of downtown LA, that subtle shift is coming from me completely ignoring those grids and the axis being drawn straight to those landmarks. Those landmarks then adding to the site. So it's not following necessarily a right angle or I guess you say anything rudimentary. It's just, it's that subtle shift in taking it straight from those landmarks.
This is another super interesting, very compelling, very beautifully drawn project. And I think what's interesting about this one is that it starts to entertain different capacities of architecture. I think that the kind of referencing other aspects of the city is and kind of attempting to have some degree of context within the geometric construction is interesting. I think the ambition of the program is also very compelling. But I'm curious, it's this, the studio is very much in a very specific line of inquiry, which I commend, and I think it's really compelling. And so far, the projects we've seen are very, very strong. But I'm curious, Max, if this is opened up ideas of performance to you at all? If you're kind of entertaining thoughts of, if you are selecting landmarks that then start to form the geometries of the building, if those landmarks have some sort of significance or there's some sort of criteria as to choose why to choose those landmarks. If you've thought about what sort of programs, I think the program seems really interesting, but if now that you sort of assign this program, if there's been any developments you're thinking about what kind of programs does this sort of formal generation facilitate? And if there's other sorts of, it's kind of like now that you have this tool, I'm curious what you think of what to do with it next.
Yeah, when I first thought of those categories, civil, infrastructural, and cultural, what I wanted it is not just the projections to, for it to be projected, those geometries being projected into the site, but in some way, it's what we need as a society, in some form or another, to have one as the way LA has it. So what happens is when they were projected into there, some way or another, maybe not be wholeheartedly, but it had some type of influence on it. So with like Kaiser being projected into the site, for veterans, they need, especially recovering homeless veterans, they need some type of medical care. They need some type of psychological treatment. They need some type of something along those lines. City Hall, something structural, something that abstractly is structural, something that provides some type of structure. And then Union Station, something that provides some type of transportation, some types of means. These veterans are going in there, it being a halfway home, they're going in there to be revitalized and then move on out. They're transitioning from one point to another. So that kind of was the idea behind why I chose those three in particular.
Gotcha. And the process of designing this project this way changed that at all?
Honestly, I think I would choose three different ones just to entice it to see what else I could tease out, as a designer. But outside of that, I'm very satisfied with what I ended up choosing, and just me trying to dive into it a little bit more.
So I think just it's kind of like, I think there's an interesting potential symbolism for the ones that you chose and how they then manifested themselves. And I appreciate your kind of embrace of sort of a search process of saying, like, I would pick three different ones to see kind of what happens then in terms of emergence. But I find myself wondering, like, if you're doing this sort of geometric mashup that you're doing, is there a way that the ingredients could have more than symbolism? Is there a way that the ingredients could start to either sculpt a space that's more that is somehow in tune with what you have in terms of what would be the geometric requirements for space for veterans? Those sorts of things. It feels to me like with this tool that the search could become even more sort of there feels like there's an opportunity for this to be more functionally driven, but I don't think that was the point of the studio at all, and I'm not saying it should have been, but I am saying it's such an amazing sort of formal exploration that I'm so intrigued by it. I'm curious, like, yeah, what would happen if you were intentionally sampling different kinds of formal tracks to then produce a specific kind of dance mix to, like, take that metaphor further.
I really like that comment, and I kind of want to piggyback on that, because there's kind of two ways of maybe seeing your project. One is in your kind of your precedents, which are about I'm going to put this into a kind of dialectic, the figure field dialectic, which this John Soane and the Equestrian's Palace and the Bank of England, like all those earlier precedents are establishing a series of figures that set up that are hierarchies within a field. So there's kind of like offsets of room grain around those figures in the plan. And then those things have to contend or are contingent upon maybe the irregularities of sight, right? And that produces something new, or a productive tension between the figure field and sight. And then there's the geometric process, right? In which something new is produced by, for you, I think, in that analytical drawing, the blue one, where there's the scale and growth and rotation of a figure in both plan and section. And that produces an overlap, right? So a hierarchy is established, right? A kind of 9-square grid with a major center and then 4 like perimeter spaces, and then a small grain in between that. And then that gets scaled and rotated over and over and over again. And those overlaps produces a finer and finer and finer grain of spaces. And so we get a kind of embeddedness of figure within figure, and still maintain some sense of hierarchy. Right. I think this drawing is super duper compelling to me, because it has all the richness that might have been offered by maybe, let's say in your precedents, site and program, but this process on its own infers maybe how site or program could be absorbed into it, just simply by a process of scaling and rotation and overlap. And I was wondering if maybe this process that happens largely in plan could maybe carry over to your, when you arrive at site. Yeah. And with the particularities of your program, seems more promising to me than the projection of profiles from the immediate context onto this kind of let's say conceptual volume. It's more that you would maybe like tune the system to orient itself to these maybe larger sight lines or larger vantage points. So it's more like inward looking out rather than pulling the out to in to generate the process, because I think you had a really, really great process in terms of the analytical drawing, right? And I think I was hoping or wondering if you could maybe follow that through a little bit more, because there's so much richness in producing that subtle, you were producing different kinds of inflections, or maybe it wasn't subtle inflections, but you were producing hierarchy, organization of room, and also new figures through that kind of recursive process of the scale and growth of the square. By the way, that's one version of scaling and growing a square. There's another one in which you take the diagonal of the square and you project it and you do it again and do it again. I mean, that might be another process to which you could maybe use both of these scale and growth strategies to produce hierarchy, subdivision, and new figuration within the site, and then tune that system to connect back to the city in particular ways, depending on its sidedness.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that you've kind of done what all good sort of final works of architecture school is. It's like you've created your own sort of set of logics. The reason why I asked earlier, sort of what the subtle shift is I think that this project could be even more successful on a site that's more partial to a grid like downtown LA. And I wonder if maybe you kind of use the same process that you've created to take it into other spaces, just because if it's going to shift from something, I feel like it needs before you can break a rule set, you need a rule set. And this particular site sort of curves and sort of doesn't follow the necessarily logic of a city planning. And so I wonder if you've ever sort of tried this or if you could try this logic using almost even the same three sort of buildings that you projected onto the site in other locations.
Okay.
Max, I want to go back to some of the provocations that Alex brought up with asking you about sort of the social programs that were chosen and why they were chosen for you as a veteran. And I kind of wish I had that information earlier in the presentation when you were sort of giving your synopsis of what your research agenda was about. Because the more I look at your project, the less I see a project about the city as buildings as a city, but more so about the necessity to be sensitive to those who we typically ignore. And that's unfortunately a lot of times people that are veterans. And then there are issues that go beyond that we find in Los Angeles and Miami and Chicago, all over the country. Yeah. And so for me, I kind of want your project to be siteless. And the reason why I say siteless is because I feel as though there are various locations as to where you can do this process of finding the necessary ancillary programs that a veteran would need to be successful within the housing structure, right? So in this case, you've chosen law, transportation, and medical, right? I could assume that another version of this would be education, food, and perhaps open space or something, right? So I can imagine a multitude of these sort of become sort of a taxonomy of the needs of a veteran, and then how you deploy those in various locations. Right. And so obviously this could be one example of that process to see if it's successful or not, but you can have many more examples of just the plan, which can show us, here's my rule set. It's completely applicable regardless of the location, because it goes off a certain basic set of rules, which are, these are the needs of this population. Here's how we can bring these needs together. And regardless of what empty lot you give me, it generates this specific form. And perhaps the sort of unrolling and unraveling of the building is the thing that allows everybody to understand that even though the building might be in Baldwin Hills, in East LA, and in Burbank, there's something that connects them through the facade, so we understand this is all sort of the same building topology and the same logic. So we can see that there's an idea behind the entire thing, right? And again, these are all assumptions I'm reading into your project, but I see a lot of self-narrative in this project through you that I didn't see in the text. And that only came about through Alex's questions to you about the reason why you chose certain programs. So feel free to let me know if I'm reading this totally wrong, or if those were some of the ideas behind the genesis of the project.
So when the beginning of the project, the text is definitely adheres to what the genesis of the project was. And program started just evolving, I guess you would say, evolved with it. And that's what led to the end result. And that's what was kind of, so it was the applicability of what I set out to do from the beginning and what I researched, and then tying that into that logic, that program logic of what is to come. So it was just a step-by-step process. Yeah, it wasn't like I set out to do that originally, and I'll be honest with that. It was very just so much like tied in with it as I started growing with the project.
Got it.
We might have time for one more comment if anyone else has anything else to say, or I can just move on.
I think it's really interesting, like, what everyone's saying, how you chose these different programs. You kind of ended up with like a monastery for veterans, right? Like a monastery to help veterans, because you have like a housing, commissary, a training facility, and you got this little like city that you have for the veterans that's closed by the shell. I'm curious, like, with the tracing of the different projections on that facade, how did it end up with like this spirograph in the center? Like you have this big circular hole that gets cut out. Was that just because of all the way they got projected, or?
It was literally like they just started falling in line with one another. It was not even intentional. And I questioned it, and it ultimately led to me just keeping it. I just, stick with what had occurred and keep that accident.
Yeah, because it seems like it from that unrolled elevation, like you might see all of those edges kind of continue up to the side and be very Toyoito, but then you just like through that projection, there's this giant hole, and you get this like almost, I don't know, like ceremonial cap on top of everything. That's really interesting, and I think it's a great project, and I really commend the way like you what everyone's been saying, the way you chose the programs to intersect with each other and how that generated. The one other thing I'm kind of curious about is if, like, say, because you had said originally it might have been Dodger Stadium, so following your logic could have been there needs to be some recreation facilities for these veterans, so we're going to continue with the Dodger Stadium. I wonder what that would have done to everything else because of its scale compared to the other buildings, and like what that would have done. I don't know if that was an issue for you early on, that maybe the scale was too big.
I wouldn't say the scale was too big. It was just ultimately I knew that something cultural doesn't necessarily mean, because Dodger Stadium in the city of LA, I mean, that's that's cultural, and I knew that if I wanted it to be centrally focused on this specific program, I needed to reduce that heavy influence, because again, if that was the case, there would have been a completely different portion of the building that would be probably more massive to that scope.
Yeah, so it would have too much of an influence.
Yeah,
that's what I assumed. Good project though, really interesting, really well done.
Thank you,
Max. I think you got some really good feedback and work. I think one of the things that's interesting about this project is that it takes on, the studio has a clearly kind of formal disciplinary agenda, and you brought a social agenda to it, which I think is compelling. I also, I'm always learning things by the way students take on different problems. And I think one of the things I'm looking at in your project that is occurring to me now is that essentially, we looked at this idea of the offset primarily as a problem of plan and sometimes in section, right? But I think your unrolled elevation, excluding all of the apertures and things that happen inside of it, just the relationship between, let's say, the ground line of the elevation and the top line of the elevation introduces an idea of thinking about this same problem, but in elevation, literally as a kind of connection, the top and the bottom of that building as it unrolls around. So I think that's a super compelling part of the project. In addition, you also took this on in plan, and I think in a rich way. So there's like these multiple ways in which you tried to grapple with this problem. And I think your project is, as Aaron said, truly a kind of thesis project in which you're really taking on a problem and trying to grapple with it a series of ways, right? Sean pointed out that early drawing that you looked at, right? So there's just a kind of a lot of exploration happening with different ways of formally grappling with this in plan, in section, in elevation. So I think it's really really successful in that regard. And I mean, also I'll echo like a really beautiful presentation. So congratulations on a great project. A real pleasure working with you, Max.
Thank you, Mark.
So now, oh, sorry, I muted myself. We're moving on, and we're moving on to Matt, not Max, Matt. And then I pasted it into his link into the chat room, so you guys can just grab that and throw that in there. And then after we'll do this one, then we'll take a 10-minute break, and I'll get everyone a coffee. Bad Zoom joke. Okay, so let's just see. We got everybody. Is everyone on that board now? Okay.
Seems like Matt just has himself muted.
Matt.
I'm here.
Okay, unmute yourself. So why don't you go ahead and take control of the board? Make sure to moderate. Super important. And
all right. Good.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt, and title of my project is Oriented Otherwise. And like how it's named, I focused on how rotational offset can create city of rooms or buildings within buildings. And by using rotational offset, I think it suggests variant grid, different set of rules and different looks to each variant spaces. But then at the same time, those variant spaces will still maintain spatial relationships to each other. And on this slide, it's showing the floor plan of first construction document of Austrian Postal Saving Bank by Otto Wagner. And overall plan of the building is defined by intersection between rectangular spaces and trapezoidal figure. And those rectangular spaces, they will create beams, columns, and those spaces will define office spaces. And what I found interesting about this plan was I found 3 moments, and in between each of those 3 joints, those rectangular office spaces will be filled in. And by articulating those 3 joints, I realized that those 3 joints are heavily dependent to each other. And
Matt, Matt, can you
no?
Can you take moderation so that people know what you're?
Okay.
I asked it. Yeah, sorry. So no one knows what you're looking at. Yeah. So Zoom. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, got it. So this was the plan, and then, like I said, I articulated these 3 moments, and like I said again, they're heavily dependent to each other, and then those 3 joints are what maintains the trapezoidal shape. And out of those 3 joints, I focused on joint C, which was located on right bottom corner from a previous slide. And what I saw from here was I saw 2 rectangles, which will be one being inner and one being outer. And the obviously inner rectangle is hatched with the light lines, and outer rectangle will be bound by the thicker line on outer edge. And as you can see, just simple rotation of inner rectangle will create different set of rules to create these openings and this different set of thickness of wall. And like I said before, because of this angle shift, this continues to joint A, and it will continue back to joint B. So like I said, those three are all connected to each other, and I for further step, I focus on orienting inner shape and outer shape opposite direction. So this is what I have for 2D study. I use 2 to 3 rectangles, and each of them will have their own inner smaller rectangle, and whenever outer rectangle is orienting 10 degrees, then the inner rectangle will orient negative 10 degrees. So I rotated them until they maintain the original shape, which will, so for set A, I started with using 2 rectangles, and then I rotated them till they get back to their original shape. And for this studies, I realized that there's some moment when inner rectangles becomes exterior. So there's and those will be hatched with the thicker lines, which will be these tiny pushes. And I thought this moment could be later on, it could be developed as openings and or like other type of spaces. After that, I extruded those rectangles to give them difference, not only in two dimensions. I oriented each rectangles differently on also on the z-axis, so I can create different volume, not only in x and y-axis. So I can create spatial difference on z-axis. So, and after that, I use those three. I use previous method to kind of stack up those extruded rectangles to kind of come up with dynamic different wall thickness. But then I realized that even though they're creating different spaces, but still each of rectangles are orienting by their own rules. So I thought they're not connected. So for example, for this one, I split the object in half and flipped it to see the interior and exterior. But then, so this will be 1, 2, 3, and those three rectangles are orienting by their own rules. So I thought they're not really spatially connected. So I came up with different set of rules to create to set up the rules, and by using this ellipse as starting point and divided them into specific numbers to get the intersections, right? And I came up with like ring of unitized space. And on the right side of this drawing, I came up with section cut for each of unitized space. And after that, I, instead of putting them individually, I put them next to each other to kind of see how they will be look like. After that, I chose my site. It's gonna be 1130 East 6th Street, Los Angeles, and it's surrounded by school, shopping mall, and park. And originally this site was existed as Metro Division, and I thought I could use this existing road and the existing program as I thought I can use benefit from it. So after that, I liked the centralized plan. So starting from that, this was what that this was I use baseline as an ellipse to kind of start to create the different looks, and after that I use a bunch of different shapes as a baseline to kind of create different variations. And this one I use circle, and like I could start seeing that interior and exterior spaces are very it's like very different, and at the same time like interior programs will have their own set of rules, and also same for exterior. So after that I could I got more control to control of changing the angle of orientation and rotation. And so this is what I have. One on the left will be section, and one on the right will be plan. And as you guys can clearly see on plan, um, uh, interior programs and exterior walls are clearly distinct to each other, and yeah. And then to better understand, I articulated inner interiors unitized housing unit, which will be on hatched. And then this darker housing unit will be covered, will be inside of the exterior volume. And to articulate that, I unwrapped the exterior volume to articulate housing units. And this will be my axle drawing. I ended, and as you can see, back to my 2D diagram, as we can see, there's movement openings on exterior view on the facade. That was originally interior of this exterior volume, and because of orienting them otherwise, interior volumes that it creates openings for exterior volume. And this will be the plan, ground floor plan. And so north side, which is left side of the drawings, mostly I dedicate to Metro Division. So, and like parking for bus. And on the right side of the drawing, these inner spaces will be mostly dedicated to the housing unit. And above this space will be also housing unit, but then on this space on right side, the housing unit will be elevated a little bit up, so like these spaces could be used as parking space for people who live there. And this will be my section, and as we can see, there's dynamic difference between interior and exterior. And on this drawing, I articulated housing unit 1 and 2, which is located on this side, and I splitted them half and half so I could see how inside of the building housing unit will look like.
All right, Matt, I think that's good. We should probably leave some time for,
Okay.
yeah.
Matt, I think this is an absolutely beautiful project. This is incredible, so beautifully represented, and so much extensive formal exploration with this. It's really remarkable.
Thank you.
I'm curious. It's really it's exceptional for sure. I'm curious. Now that you've experienced this process,
Mhm.
and if you were to deploy a similar process again, do you have a sense of where you would determine that the initial formal investigations, once deployed upon a site, do you have a sense of determining how, or do you have a sense of if or how you would be able to determine if those are the right formal investigations for that site? Because I think at this point you have such incredible and extensive searching, and it's kind of like without things like program and context initially, I'm curious, like, well, okay, when you then deploy those things and you add the program and you add that and you place it on context, sure, it can evolve, but do you ever have any sort of check where you're like, I should have done the initial process differently, I should have done a different process? Do you have a sense of how you gauge the sort of appropriateness of the things you do initially before you deploy it?
I'm not sure that I understood your question correctly, but then like I think the site that I chose, like up to the midterm, I didn't like my project, and I still kind of believe that my project isn't really like site driven. So I think this could be really built anywhere in any site. But then the program, I had hard time choosing my program other than housing, so the program kind of came at the end after. So
Gotcha. No, I totally get it. I mean, it's the kind of thing where it's clearly, you know, that was not the driver, and those things were secondary. But I find myself just curious about this idea of formal exploration, and then syncing up with other criteria that are components of architecture, how that sync happens, how any sort of feedback loop could be produced from that, all that sort of thing. But I think you're investigating the form, and the form is exquisite. So very nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with those comments, and I mean, I think the process and the drawings are just absolutely. I mean, they're gorgeous and very sumptuous and layered, and they have a lot of depth. maybe this question of how this process maybe get tuned or maybe more or maps on more tightly to program might be about revisiting the process a little bit. And I think one of the interesting things in your process at the beginning was what produces the rotational offset, or what comes out of the rotational offset. So, and you succinctly isolated 3 moments or 3 new artifacts that are produced in that rotational offset. It's the sequential figure, it's the poche, right? And it's the room at a corner that is allegiant to 2 grains, right? And these things are operating maybe at 3 different scales. But I think when you proceeded in the process that you honed in on one of them. So one of these exceptions within the system becomes the new norm, and that's the poche. So it's the kind of like proliferation of a series of volumes that overlap and produce this kind of variable poche through the project. And it's done beautifully well in that regard. But I'm wondering if there might be room for the other 2 exceptions that you found to emerge in a project. One, the sequential figure that is negotiating 2 angles in plan and in section. And then the other one is a series of rooms that are at a smaller scale than the volumes that you have, that might be, let's say, support spaces, or might offer another grain of interior that the large scale process doesn't quite offer yet. And so I think it's there. I think you have all the right ingredients, but maybe you left out maybe you left out, or you didn't mind the other 2 exceptions or anomalies that you discovered earlier in the work. Otherwise, I think it's really beautiful. I mean, I love this relationship between the discrete and the continuous, of how discrete volumes begin to articulate a continuous perimeter. But I'm really also interested in how those figures are negotiated in both plan and section, and also produce. I think right now everything's operating a little bit at the same scale in both plan and section, and I think accommodating those other 2 exceptions from earlier in the process could add some difference or some productive tension in the drawings. But I mean, in terms of an investigation, I think it's really, really, really great and really, really rich.
Thank you.
Matt, can you explain the 2 animations for me, please?
So one on the left side is section, plan animation for section, cutting all the way through. And one on the right side will be plan animation for plant. And for the plan animation on the right side, if you stop on the middle, you will clearly see how the spaces are creating so how differences between interior programs and exterior lines creates new space which could become circulation for people, or parking space for car, like vehicles.
Matt, I wonder, when I look at your axon and also the plan, that the building configures itself into a courtyard typology, through the introduction of the the ellipse or the oval.
Mhm.
And in relationship to this question, the formal language of the discrete and the continuous, when I think about a circle or an oval, let's say a circle has one center and an oval has two centers, that it produces, in terms of the experience of the housing, that the courtyard sets up something where there's a kind of collective center or a collective room in the middle that kind of holds together as a unit that the perimeter maybe doesn't need to abide by. So the discreteness, the roughness of the perimeter might give way to something that's maybe more smooth on the interior, or I'm wondering if there could be another language or another resolution of the form along on the inside of the courtyard, because it is more about a kind of collective center versus the way in which the volumes array themselves on a perimeter might be more about the individual housing unit. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again?
I'm wondering that the way in which you array the units, right, and around the ellipse, and the way in which they overlap produces this kind of rough serrated edge on both sides of your project. On the inside within the courtyard, and on the outside towards the city, right? And I'm wondering, because your project falls in this formal dialectic of the discrete and the continuous, the discrete volumes arrayed on a curve that produces a continuous figure, that because you produce this interior room that all of the housing units benefit from, the courtyard, that might take on a different formal language that's about the collective versus the individual.
So the reason why I chose the elliptical shape was, if going back to first slide, the plan of the poster office, Austrian poster office saving bank, just because of how they maintain the shape of trapezoid, it automatically creates courtyard at the center of in between these three corners. So the reason why I chose elliptical shape as my base was to create some type of core or like central gathering space that kind of gathers all the housing units. Or so that's why that's how those housing units becomes circular on each side. And so I wanted to create some type of circulation inside of those elliptical shape.
No, I get that. I think I guess what I'm asking for is that that there's a really exciting thing about how you use geometry and the perception of it at different scales, and also typology too. So something like setting up a courtyard building that's about viewing across that void, and it's only internal to those residents, is very different from how one views what's inside of their own unit, right? And so I'm wondering if maybe you can tune the formal expression of the project between the outer ring and the inner ring to set up these different modes or acts of viewing. And so it's more about like a question of not the diagram or the typology itself, but more about the way in which you can start to maybe tune some of these processes and procedures to program and sequence more tightly. And so I think there's an opportunity to maybe think about the resolution or the reading of that interior courtyard as maybe not always proliferating the individual unit through something that's a little bit more smooth and continuous, or more about the collective, so that we understand it more as a big room rather than a series of individual volumes forming a perimeter.
Yeah, I think that you have such a beautiful collection of work, and it's clear that there's so much rigor put into every move you make. But I wonder if there's a missing step where you sort of analyze the nodes that you have through another lens, whether it's program or site, that allows you to start then to bring that back and add sort of like a more realistic rigor to the project. That like if you look at your where your cursor is, like are there some of these that create better like living room areas or courtyard areas, and then they can be applied to the sort of next step where you like lay them out on the site to bring back sort of because once you've created a bunch of things, I think it's also important to sort of look at them and see why they're successful or why they're not successful, and then you can come back and you can sort of explode them on the site using your methodology.
I think
That's such a good point, Aaron, because like you really see how you have those overlaps of geometry in that first investigation, and then the overlaps in your own trials, and then you start to have those overlaps in section that look really interesting. Of like, I mean, it's in your plan too, but it's really interesting where you have these like darker shades, and that's obviously like the housing program, and then you have some like gaps around the tops and the sides of all that program. So it's like, how do those two things start to relate, of like these geometries that are shifting to create overlap space, but then also these programs that have to like adhere within those shifted spaces, and how those two things overlap, the overlap of a public and a private program between two differing geometries that are 10 degrees off each direction. I think that's a really like a good place to take this project a little bit further. Like, how do those things resolve?
Yeah, and I think the two animations that you made, Matt, could be really helpful in sort of highlighting the comments made, the last two sets of comments. I think particularly in this section, there's sort of patterns and systems that emerge that are almost more legible in the animations than in the final project. And studying those animations, they start to kind of gain clarity, I guess. And then I think, the axon shows it as well, this the systems that are emerging, and while there's a lot of geometry and you are very skillful at sort of manipulating it and drawing it and finessing it, that perhaps another pass focusing on this animations to kind of really distill the essence of what's happening in all of that geometry, that could then be another pass in both plan and section to kind of I guess accentuate it without it getting lost in the amount of geometry that's in there.
Yeah. So we kind of have to, we're a little bit over here on this one, but I mean, I'm going to take moderation for a second here. And I think I want to just build on some points that were made and kind of conclude this. I think, Matt, on the very first pinup of the semester, you put these two drawings up on the wall, right? And when you did that, I think everyone in the studio realized, okay, the semester has started. We got to get moving here. This is some serious stuff we're doing, right? Like you put that up, and everyone's like, it's on now, all right? So I mean, this drawing in particular, right? But I also like that this drawing still has relevance, right? It keeps coming back as a thing, saying, how can I start to look back at that drawing and use that to evaluate the work that I've done thus far, right? Or where I am at the level of the unit, at the level of the overall figure, at the level of the interior courtyard. And then when I get to this drawing, which is, I think, the last drawing you made this semester, and I think it was kind of funny. You're like, okay, and this drawing really explains the unit. And I don't think it explains the unit at all. I think it's stunning. I think it's a stunning drawing, and I think it explains the next set of steps you might take, right? And I think that's the kind of amazing thing about this process, is you've presented it as a kind of linear process. And when you talked about it, you're like, I did this and I did this, but that's sort of not that correct in how this project really works. I mean, it's kind of a non-linear process for sure, right? And you've been working back and forth, and I see this thing as the next piece that really starts to feed a whole new set of geometric explorations. The presentation is beautiful. The drawings are beautiful. Everyone's already said that, and I just want to commend on that. I particularly like the kind of Cherise details that you've added here with the specific like overlap of the scale figure, or the scale cutting through the frame, which is something from Cherise specifically, and then the key plans. really beautiful, and the fonts. So great work. So congratulations, it's been a real pleasure working with you. We're gonna now take like a 10-minute break, folks, and then we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes. And we have just 2 more projects after the break. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I think people are now. I think Matt did a good job of making people get into the animation. So I think that's
Yeah.
going to make sure that people be into yours.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully.
I pasted the wrong board. Oops. And
Oh, you pasted Yixies.
yeah, I'm going to fix that right now.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, please use the second one I just sent, not this board, the second panel. Sorry, guys. So I don't know if everybody saw, but I pasted the link. It's the most recent link. I accidentally pasted the wrong link to start. So it's this link down that ends with K76I. K76I. Yes, Aaron. We should be Aaron, and we should be everybody. Jermaine. Yeah, I think we got everybody. Sean, not okay. We should be on Kenya's board, which is orange. There's an orange outline around it, and the link is the last part of the link is K76I. I pasted the wrong link initially to start. Alex and Greg and Lisa and Sean. There we go. It's nice to have my students critiqued by one of my former students. It's kind of exciting.
It's fun to see the work.
It's gonna happen again. I'm just gonna get older, and then these guys will be on one of my reviews one day. Give me a hard time, and I'll be with a cane behind this table, well, somewhere. Hopefully by that time, coronavirus quarantine will be over.
I gave you a hard time from the first day of class all the way through the end of graduation.
Yeah, you're still giving me a hard time. I know. I don't know why. I'm trying to figure out why I invited you again. I'm trying to think. All right, Sean's back. Lisa's back. Let's go give Greg a second here.
The little ones haven't made any appearances. What's going on? Is that why you're hiding outside?
That's right. I'm in the backyard. I have a chain link fence and a wooden door between me and my children. Safest place to be. And this gigantic concrete wall. So I'm all set. It's good advice if you need any for child rearing.
Wasn't it raining during the mid-review, Mark? Weren't you out there in the rain?
It wasn't raining. No, it was just very cold. It was cold.
Okay.
I was on my front during the rain. I went on my front porch.
Oh, right.
I have like a really small, like 4 foot by I don't know, 6 foot front porch, and I just set my desk up in there and locked the front door. Worked out great. It's a little cold, but now now it's 80, so it's fine. Just give Greg a second more to get back with us.
At least it's not rainy seeing you there like it is here. Here we get maybe like 3-4 hours of just nonstop rain, and then it stops, and then everything's dry. You just gotta hope that you're dugging raindrop.
Yeah, no, it's done raining here for the year. It's not gonna rain anymore. It's gonna be hot and dry here on out.
Maybe
Really
like
hot
we can
with 100% humidity.
Yeah, I know, you got the heat. All right, so we're gonna let Kenya get started here. So and Ken, you've got moderation.
Yeah.
And everybody's back, and everybody's on Kenya's board. It's the orange board. Now I sent the wrong link originally. So Kenya, you should see she's got you zoomed in on a figure right now.
An orange board?
There's an orange outline around it.
Oh.
Yeah, so here I see you're moving around, Lisa Little. I see you.
Am I in the right place? Okay.
Yeah, there's an oblique color figure right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Kenya.
Okay, my name is Kenya, and my project is called City of Walls. Architecture is not a problem of subdividing mass to produce space. Architecture is the accumulation of elements that add up to a set of discrete but interrelated forms and spaces. The path of Diocletian is an example of this, in which the element of the wall is repeated to n scale to produce a set of nested spaces that are both unified and divided by niches within the wall, and by interruptions and intrusions. The main bath building introduces another wall with similar properties to the compound wall, as both prevents and invites overlap between the interior and exterior. The interior of the baths continues on this theme as rooms composed of walls assert individual identity while adhering to an overall formal logic building. The project deploys a similar technique for housing, in which the excessive use of wall unifies space through division. Walls are circulation, walls are housing units, walls are museums, walls are youth centers. This is a project for a city of walls. So, creating 4 different plant categories, I studied trilateral, a grid system that the plant created. The plant that created an intriguing system is Bath of Diocletian by Maximin, 306 after Common Era. The plan is symmetrical and has 3 different systems that are used to make up the plan. Columns created a grid system that was translated from one side to the other. Columns were not only placed for structural purposes, but also to create privacy in public rooms. The thickness in rooms between rooms created a system that divided spaces and made space for circulation. Walls. The study of walls created a grid system that allowed for circulation to run from one side of the plan to the other and a center to mirror itself. The wall grid system created a spatial interlocks nested and void spaces within the pre-existing space. It was difficult to portray a 3-dimensional model in a 2-dimensional drawing. This was the model that I got from this drawing, but the challenge to show it in a 3-dimensional way in a 2-dimensional drawing was difficult, and that's when the study of these came. Each face from the 3-dimensional model created its own model. This face created this model, And I divided it in 3 different portions, so 3 colors for program purposes. I'm not sure where the video is. Can you guys see the video? Because it's not showing in mine. Mark.
Kenya, it's playing. Yeah, everyone has to play the video themselves, I think.
Because on my own concept board, it's not playing. I can't see it at all.
You might have to just refresh it. But that's okay if it's not playing.
Okay.
Can everyone else see the video on the site?
As long as everybody else can see it. Okay. It was essential to first pick a site that would have a need for the program. The building is proposing housing and a youth center. The building is located by the Los Angeles River near Glezel Park. The project is placed near Homeboy Industries, that's 4 miles away. The program was to work with the community and make a livable space for youth at risk. It was essential to, a housing is placed towards the LA River, which is this orange one. The blue is the youth center, it's placed towards the street side. And the green one is an interior jungle that forces the interlocking programs together with the presence of nature enclosing the path. The complexity of the interior, a simple shell would be able to begin to highlight the interactions that are happening inside. With the interior being overloaded, the walls and open spaces, a minimal surface shell would encourage one to explore within to comprehend the interactions. So from here, you can see how the shell introduces the interior inside. And then can you please play the video? With cuts every 5 feet, one can start to understand how one moves through, as well as a general understanding of how public and private spaces may be. Did the video end for you guys?
Still going.
Oh yeah. Let me know when it ends because I really can't see.
Just end it for me.
Okay. So walls serve to create a private space in a public program. The building itself created a set of ramps to move through the building. And can you guys play this video? The section demonstrates the interlocking of spaces and the movement through it. In addition, a clear understanding of how the walls interact with each other, with the program and with the voids. Did it finish? It's kind of long.
Still going, Kenya. Just give everybody a second to watch it.
Okay.
You're good, Kenya.
Okay. So predetermining where the program goes, once the abundance of walls was laid out, the program was then fabricated to fit within the constraints of the spaces that were created from the walls. The section shows the intricate interactions of the wall among one another. The detail of this section demonstrates that walls are essential to private and public spaces. In conclusion, walls are circulation, rooms, and youth centers. There are buildings within a building. And now I'd like to open my presentation for critique.
So give up. Yeah, good.
There you go.
So Kenya, I remember your project very well from the mid-review, and I think it's one of my favorite projects from this section. I was hoping I would get to see it again today.
Yeah.
So congratulations. I think it's an excellent project. I am intrigued to look at the section here at the end, because I think you are starting to develop some things that you're not even saying that you're doing. So on top of all the things that you're saying you're doing, which you are doing, you're doing them successfully. I think that the project at this level now, where you've got it to at the end, you're even starting to be able to register much smaller degrees of detail in terms of, like, you suggest it here, at least in the section, so I'm reading it that way, things to do with anything from furniture to chases for infrastructure and all sorts of detail on like ceiling details, et cetera. So there's like a whole nother degree. So not only is it working, I think, programmatically and as a kind of way of integrating to the site that you've chosen and the kind of poche and overlay that you've set out to do, it's working even at a much smaller grain and doing so nicely. And the drawings are, as they were at the mid-review, quite compelling as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if, by the way, I really thought the analysis was quite beautiful, and actually the analysis of all the projects that I've seen so far, all those drawings and all that research material, it's just been really fantastic. I mean, it's like really incredible. The attention to drawing and understanding those precedents that you've each done. And I particularly like your catalog of precedents too. And I think what you're doing in your final two sections are interesting. And maybe this is more of a question for you. And I think but it's like the legibility of the part to the whole. So the part for you being the wall, and then the whole being the entire building. And I could see it going two ways. On the one hand, that the way in which we read the long section, we understand the part of the wall very clearly. But when we understand the short section, that the contiguity of the walls together, how they're contiguous, and also the voids in which they also frame, produces a new figure in the short section, which is about the kind of the perpendicular grain of the wall, which are like bands, right?
Yeah.
Is that okay for you, or should the walls always be legible in both the short and long section?
So
on the one hand, I see it as an invention. On the other hand, I also maybe it breaks the rules a little bit, but
yeah. I'm gonna moderate again. So when I did this study, I actually only used the vertical lines. I didn't use the horizontal lines to produce my model, my physical model that I ended up with. So I grabbed the vertical lines from this project, and I used it all throughout. And then the horizontal lines came after, because I wanted the section not to read as the short section not to read as the long section. Okay. I wanted them to have openings, like here in the, sorry, I'll stop moderating. Here in the axonometric, you can see how it looks like it's a continuous, but there's hardly ever lines on the short section. There is some, but like little partitions, but the long section was to read as a whole, and the short section to have little like voids in them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an interesting invention, because it's about inevitably in any grain project that you have to always deal with the perpendicular axes. Yeah. And so I think your introduction of the void was a smart move of creating spaces that laterally connect and also producing opportunities of light. So I think that's really great.
Thank you.
And I think your project is absolutely stunning. And I say that, one, because just the amount of intellectual rigor that you put into just the cataloging of the process, and then you continue that all the way through the end through execution, is extremely difficult, and it's extremely mature, because a lot of times students get to a point where the analysis bogs down the rest of the project, and then they're in such a hurry to get to the design portion they abandoned all of the labor they put into the project in the beginning.
I
And
wanted to keep repeating this that walls are important from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did not do that, because then it makes the project a lot more digestible to viewers who haven't actually seen the work, because it's easy to follow along. So I didn't even need you to narrate the project. I can easily just go through your diagrams, go through your text, and then understand what you were trying to generate, which is extremely difficult to do. So definitely kudos to that. I'm extremely taken by the axonometric. Mainly because it looks so foreign to me. Like it looks like it's a spaceship or something from something from Star Wars or something. It doesn't look like housing, but when I get to the actual section, it's familiar. It's extremely familiar, right? So the ability to take something that's abstract and make it very familiar is extremely interesting to me, and super cool. Just to be extremely blunt. And I think that your interrogation of the wall is super fascinating to me, because I'm super interested in super thick walls at the moment. It's like, how can we shove as much program we can into these spaces that are often forgotten? And you just highlighting that has definitely been pleasurable for me to see, all the way from the drawings of your dissection of your precedents, all the way through the execution at the end in the long and the short section. And I think the diagrams that you have in the videos highlight that rigor that you put in. So exemplary presentation. It is fantastic.
Thank you.
I think that you also chose a really perfect site for your project. The sort of like the horizontality of the work against the LA River creates this like really monumental feel to your project. I have a tiny criticism of the plan drawings. I think that you've started to put entourage in there, and I think you either have to go all the way in with entourage or pull back to just very simple drawing. Because it's like just a bit of a tease to see like a paintbrush in one place and then another. So and also my mom works at Homeboy, and I think they'd be just like, you should share this with them, just because I think that there's like, I think it's a really beautiful project, but it also situates in a larger context that I think you but again, these are really beautiful drawings. I just encourage you to maybe spend a little bit more time on the plans, because I don't think they do the service of the rest of your project.
Yeah.
I wonder, and I'm guessing the answer is yes, was the straight and vertical of each wall like a decision early on that these walls don't lean, or these walls don't turn, or these walls aren't curved? Was that just a decision made early on for this project? Like that's a rule?
I made this decision. First, it was I was gonna actually curve the model to the LA River, but I didn't. I wanted it to look like, I wanted the lines to like, when you see the plan, I kind of wanted it to look like it was Venom. Like the video of the planimation, I wanted it to look like it was growing into each other, but also separating when it meets each other. So the plans, the walls themselves were supposed to meet at one point and also disconnect from each other. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess I'm just getting at like each wall to me, and I don't know if I'm reading it incorrectly, seems like it's straight up and down and it's a straight line. Like there's never a bend in it, there's never a lean in it. And I wonder like what sort of issue, or what sort of like how that might take this a little bit further if like these walls are going this way and then they crash into each other and turn, or if they bend in a certain way, because you have a lot of interesting interactions between these straight walls kind of crashing into each other. And I buy the like they're going to go one direction in the plan but not so much the other direction. And I just would want to see, I guess, like what would happen if we turned one of them, or like if a set of them kind of like went off axis slightly, how would that change the layout, or how would that like start to push these interactions even further? I don't know, it's just a thought.
I didn't really go into depth like the walls footing like how you said, but I tried to mostly use the walls that it gave me from the 3 models that I got. So I tried to only put the least amount of walls that I put in manually. So I wanted it to be given from the model that I got from the whole iterations. So they weren't more as purposeful, but because it happened, that's what I was gonna grab from.
That makes sense.
I think one thing for me that I think is, well, there's several things that are compelling. One is the fact that at the very beginning of the project, you said, I'm not going to use any color. This is going to be a black and white project, right? And I think that's also pretty interesting to think about the role of color in this project and how significant like you couldn't actually do this project in black and white. It just wouldn't work, right? Color is a significant element in here, not just in terms of the representation of the project, but actually the thinking, the interrelation of spaces, and how you organized and understood volume.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is the kind of unmentioned precedent, which, like, very early when you made this drawing, you started looking at Kazimir Malevich and Zaha Hadid, right, in that relationship. Yeah. And I think that plays out in a really, and you don't even name it, but it plays out in a really compelling way. And I think the drawing that does that for me, or the representation does that really well for me, is the site animation, right, of this object moving across the site, because it does 2 things. One is it suggests obviously the relationship, the precedent. I would say I can clearly understand, although Malevich didn't make animations, right, but there was a sense of movement, I would argue, in some of those paintings, and then Zaha Hadid's for sure. But the and I'm thinking about the architectons, Malevich's architectons, which is what yeah. But then the other thing about this is that your project, this building, this proposal, it seems like it would be almost impossible to stop moving once you're in this, right? Like there's a kind of draw that draws you through the project, and you're always moving up or down, and there's no rest. It's a restless space, right? And I think that's really captured in that animation, where it's literally like you have to keep moving up or your feet are going to get cut off because it just keeps going, right? So there's a kind of amazing elegance in that animation, and I think its relationship to the site.
Yeah, Mark, I think that that's such an interesting comparison. The Malevich, it also feels there's like this beautiful rhythm that as you move through any of the animations that start to come alive. If you told me that this was like a music school, I'd totally believe it, because there's like a tenor to the work that you've created.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Am I muted? No. Okay, it's amazing the way in which it starts to articulate its relationship to the site, right? So Greg asked that question: does it bend around the river? And Kenya had played with that, right? But this idea, she was very adamant about the kind of discrete elements having their kind of axial rights. But then you see that relationship play out along the river, and it's kind of incredible. But yeah, I find this to be a really, and then the other thing I think, I want to go back to something Sean said, which is the this historical analysis, right? Your project is consistent for the entire year. You're consistent for the entire year. And so this analysis of the Bassett Diocletian was so rigorous, and your explanation of it was fantastic. The way you took it and over to here and over to here and brought it throughout the entire project, and where is in no way formally mimetic of anything that's happening in the Bassett Diocletian, but it translates it into an idea that you've executed on a project that's axial and quite different than facet dilatation. So really wonderful work. We have time for maybe one more comment. If not, I'm gonna, yeah. Congratulations, Kenya. Real pleasure working the beautiful project. The color's great. Any closing comments for anyone? No? Okay. So with that, we will go to our last project. If I will paste the correct link in here. And there you go. It's in the chat room. So we're going to go to see Lucas's project now. And just as Kenya's, there are several animations in Lucas's that are also going to be important to play. Just to remind you, I think Kenya did a good job of reminding you to play the animations because they are an important part of a project. And I think Lucas is in the same position. Okay, everyone looks like everyone is in. Lucas, you want to take moderation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Lucas Mock, and this thesis titled Vestigial Forms deals directly with offsetting as a process and explores the resulting vestiges as the outcome. Offsetting within an architectural technique is the process in which geometrical object is reproduced as a new object that parallels the source object. Essentially, walls are offsets, interior and exterior offsets, and buildings are offsets. In parallel, the production of architecture involves various forms of drawing, making, rendering, and scripting. Each of these methodologies are offsets of one another and of the architectural idea. Offsetting as a process is one that creates sameness while also creating difference. For instance, a modal shift from drawing to model represents a new set of architectural problems non-existent within the drawing. And when the resolved model gets translated or offset back into drawing, what results is something different, but also the same, and that retains some of the intrinsic properties of the former drawing. In all these examples, the offset is the unintentional byproduct of the design process, and thus, this thesis seeks to explore the consequences of offsetting as an intentional product of the architectural process. It proposes the process of offsetting as architecture. The initial investigation started by thinking about Robert Venturi's description of the contradiction between interior and exterior, and the opportunities presented by the unintended or unwanted spaces that become the architectural event. From this reading, a large set of built precedents exhibiting this tension between the interior and the exterior were gathered and categorized. Among the categorizations of lattice, intersection, embedment, and encapsulation, encapsulation was chosen, more specifically the precedent of Mosque Madrasa of Sultan Hassan in Cairo, Egypt. A proportion relational analysis of the building led to an understanding of the 3D space in terms of the 2D drawing, which parallels the offset drawings. One of these specificities of the 3D came in the form of muqarnas and their ability to resolve the square into a circle through a series of geometric offsets. This was the basis in which the project began to take shape. These set of drawings are produced by an operation that recursively offsets a closed curve, and the curve is offset on its interior and exterior in multiplicity, then inversely offset repeatedly. This intensive operation of offsets and inverse offsets should in theory produce no difference, as performing an operation on an object then performing the exact inverse of that operation would result in the original object. In mathematical terms, the starting variable x and the modifier variable y in the equation x plus y minus y simply equals x. Curiously, what results in a numerical offset is not the same as a curvilinear one. And what is observed in these drawings are the vestigial forms produced by offsetting within the drawing technique. To better understand the offsetting process, a script was written to offset a curve, then offset back again to try and recreate the original profile. What was instead observed was the difference produced by the offsetting process. The script was then applied recursively, creating offsets of offsets. The visual quality of the resulting drawing accentuates these minute differences or vestiges. The drawing was then figuratively offset from the immaterial to the material. This was achieved by way of additive manufacturing process, as this best translated the drawing offset to a material offset. What was observed was in the third axis, the vestigial forms from the drawings manifested themselves as compounded drooped forms. The consequences of the material offset were then translationally offset back into the drawing, creating elevational qualities. Again, this drawing produced another model which differed from the former. The chosen site sits between the Figget 7th Mall and the 110 freeway in Los Angeles. Through a series of offsetting processes, the contextual profile of the site is used as the generating form for the architecture. This contextual profile is taken and ran through the offsetting script to produce form. At this point, I would like to redirect the jurors to play the animation. This animation demonstrates the recursive offsetting process and its functions. So I'll just let this play through a little bit. The interior mass is constructed from concrete to provide the primary structural rigidity. Offset from the interior, oh wait, my apologies. The proposed building is a multi-story housing project that integrates all aspects of offsetting as its primary design strategy. The exterior is an offset of the city, the interior is an offset of the exterior, and rooms are offsets of the interior. Circulation is an offset of the residual spaces. The interior masses are constructed from concrete to provide the primary structural rigidity. Offset from the interior are primary and secondary steel structures that support the circulation as well as the exterior facade assembly. The exterior implements an experimental additive manufacturing process that loosely holds rocks together in a similar manner to Gramazio Kohler's research in fabrication of jammed architectural structures project. Lastly, an animation of a radial section through the project. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Just want to say that this is a really, really beautiful project and presentation. The clarity to which you explained your ideas and your process was pretty great. And I also like the project because it's critical. It's critical of the tools and processes that we inherit, and let's say software packages, but also in terms of architectural convention relative to the legibility of form. And so I think maybe in your project starts to pick up maybe some of my comments towards other projects where the vestige that's produced by the offset also produces different resolutions of form and different understandings of character from between inside and outsider, et cetera. So I think it's really successful at that level in terms of this kind of this game of formal approximation. I think I think I'm going to leave it at that, actually, as I still formulate my other comments on the final thing. But just overall, I think it was a really great presentation.
Thank you.
Maybe if I jump back in here again, maybe actually what I appreciate about this section is not the complete synthesis between the offsets. So I think in some of the other projects where poche becomes a kind of still a stand-in or leftover that produces synthesis between the interior and exterior form. I love that everything in your section is about thinness and about fit, and that we are able to maybe perceptually experience the difference. We're looking at the same thing, actually, I think, in your project. I think it's a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of Scott's Tel Aviv Museum and Tel Aviv Museum in Tel Aviv, right? Where the exterior perimeter or the surfaces are discretized in a way, they're all that and the interior geometry of the light fall are all produced out of high pars. But the light fall itself is at super high resolution, right? And the exterior envelope is at a super low resolution. So, and there are moments in that project where we're able to understand both resolutions together simultaneously. And I like that you offer these kind of gaps of spaces between the interior and exterior, and conceptually that we're looking at the same figure, but there's been some kind of formal change, some material change, some degree of resolution. So I also like this question of fit, and also allowing the leftover space, the vestige in another sense between the envelope and the interior to be perceived by the subject at once.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would say that this seems to be, at least conceptually, the sort of strongest melding of the sort of precedent operation with the studio prompt of offset. I think encapsulation seems to lend itself very well to actually inhabiting of that poche, which in a lot of projects are left over. And fascinatingly so, the fact that this actually becomes the activated inhabitable component of the project is really compelling and super interesting. I'm curious though, how do you determine how many offsets to do, and when you've done enough, or if you should do more? How do you critically engage with your process in terms of how it generates form?
Are you specifically talking about the drawings or how that translates into architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really seeing a difference between the two, because it seems to me like at least and maybe I'm misreading, but it seems like the drawings then become the sort of the framework for which space is constructed. So just, yeah.
Yeah, maybe if I direct you to, I guess, the very first process drawing.
Sure.
So as you can see, there's a certain level of kind of overstepping or letting the recursive process of offsetting kind of run its course almost too much. If you see it in this bottom right diagram, it's kind of melded into this like solid form. And so I think as a designer, you kind of have agency over when to kind of stop that script, right? And to say that at this point, this is kind of either good or sufficient. At least that's the way I approached it.
Gotcha. Yeah,
I love.
Oh,
I was going to say I love that moment, because you take the thin and you build up to the thick rather than what has been the opposite, So
yeah, there's a delicateness to this that is interesting. As I was starting my PhD program, I took different classes with Akeem Menges and John Fraser, and I was really struck like how they're discussing how they saw these similar algorithmic processes to what you're doing here as more of a version construction rather than like a optimization. And I feel like it's an interesting position for us if we are looking at this as and sort of saying, here's a range of options, and this is the one that we select, or are we creating a whole host of range of options with great options that then select themselves? I mean, I think once we start engaging with these sorts of either computational processes or generative computational processes, the kind of opportunity to start inviting in an artificial intelligence to self-select the versions, or if how much versioning we see happen here is a really compelling one. But in your case, I mean, it feels like, yeah, it's pretty clear, like from the drawing that's the one that Sean is on at the moment. It's kind of a very intuitive. This is the right curve to select. That I think you picked the right one too. But I definitely would encourage you moving forward, thinking about like, okay, how do you? Sometimes it won't be that obvious, and there could be other components that then start to inform that decision-making process as well. That I think that this process just opens up to in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But beautiful work, really compelling.
I wanna take the time from you there, Alex, because I think this conversation around computation and optimization is extremely critical. It is super important. Like as I like to joke with Mark all the time and tell him that I'm one of his disciples since he was my professor before, and I kind of attached myself to him. But one thing that I never really picked up on was the desire to go a computational route. And part of that is because of my own assumptions of what exactly am I optimizing? What efficiencies am I gaining through this process, and how do I apply those efficiencies? And Lucas, I think for you, it seems effective because of the fact that you understand the offset and the inverse offset and the sort of probabilities that happen in between that threshold, of the fact that it doesn't give us the zero sum like we think it should. It actually gives us some sort of volume instead.
Right.
And so imagine that if your script was, say, the width of a person, and that was the offset, right? Then I can imagine your form doesn't become housing, it becomes, say, a stadium or something like that, where it's like, okay, this form is optimizing the way that we allow people to view sporting events or musical events or whatever, because every time I look at your form and I look at the last two drawings on the top right, the sort of wall section and the sort of two floating worm's eye views, I see a stadium and I see something that's believable and I see something that seems extremely resolved that I actually can believe is actually able to be taken out, fabricated, and become something that I can inhabit, which is oftentimes I find that lacking in most computational processes. Like I say to say, okay, it's an object, it's something that's there, it's a folly, but is it architecture? Is it something that I can touch? Is it tangible? Right. But I think something you've been able to resolve, which I'm extremely surprised and happy for you as a sort of culminating project, is that you were able to reconcile that need for optimization and generating something that can actually be inhabited and not just for the sake of a cool object.
Thank you.
I remember this project really well from the mid review as well, and I remain excited about it. You know, at the mid review, we were talking about this idea of the misregistration as a design opportunity, and you know, you've taken it much further than we saw it at the mid review, and I think it's gone really well. But there's one moment that I'm wondering about that seems key but strange to me, which, if you look at the third column from the right, you have the diagrams where you're offsetting, and those vestiges become the circulation. And in plan, they seem very exciting because they are literally registering those misregistrations are literally drawn into the plan. But then somehow when those get translated into circulation, that misregistration gets lost. Or I think when you would experience it, you would not experience that misregistration in the circulation itself. So I was wondering if that was a conscious decision or not, because I feel like in many other ways, the premise is so strong, the computation and the celebration of these moments and the critique of computation in and of itself is great. But then in the circulation, which is one of the main things you're sort of hitting on for that, it gets a little lost in that. Was that intentional, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, in some aspects, like this is not a fully fleshed out project, at least not in my mind. So, I mean, these are still things I'm kind of exploring, and that needs greater level of resolution for sure. And yeah, I think your comments on that are valid. That kind of that misregistration or translation even that is brought into circulation may or may not get translated. And yeah, like it's something that I need to kind of look into, I guess.
Well, I guess it's, per the last comment, maybe it has to do with scale, right? So these misregistrations, how do you scale them to us, to humans, such that we then get to appreciate them and experience them, whether it be in plan, circulation, section, et cetera. It's like they're scaleless when you start with an equation, right? They mean nothing in terms of scale, but how do you correlate that, or how do you reference those things together such that it manifests at the right scale for architecture?
Yeah, I think this is just such a beautifully presented project, and I commend you for walking us through it so gracefully. I also love your answer that as architects we have agency and we can sort of make the call after we use computation to give us options. I kind of was hoping that you can talk a little bit more about how this process works sectionally, because it does look like that has a shell. And I was wondering if that is sort of the same process, but in section, because so much of your work is in plan.
Yeah, so kind of going back to, I guess, the precedent and the kind of 2D analysis of that and its ability to inform the 3D spatial qualities of that project, that really pushed me to think about drawing as a technique and how that would produce kind of the 3D. So if you look at this, I guess, third drawing in the process, from the previous, I guess, drawing, going through the material offset and back to the drawing offset, what you see in elevation is produced solely in the drawing and not necessarily created from, I guess, in the 3D. So it's exclusively the 2D that produces the 3D, and that kind of translates further throughout the project. And really, that's how the project is thought of. That it's primarily, thought of in the 2 dimensions. And so I guess the section isn't. I mean, I guess the critique there would be to maybe then in the next step to kind of take the sectional qualities of this section here, and then maybe doing an offset of that and see what that produces. But yeah, currently the everything is produced from the 2D.
I mean, it also a little bit on that comment. I was thinking a little bit when I look at your drawings of some of the collages from Joseph Albers when he visited Mesoamerica. That's a part of his kind of spatial or structural constellation series. And more famously, Homage to a Square, where the offset also starts to bring in optical implications as well, in terms of implying perspective through the scale and growth of the figure. But particularly those collages from Mesoamerica, where it's not really concentrated on one center, like Homage to a Square, but there's a kind of multiplication of centers that might start to kind of unsettle either section or elevation, or even plan. So I think what I'm saying is that your project could totally absorb those kinds of, or to think about the offset in terms of the optical and the perceptual, as well as the organizational as well.
All right. Yeah. I mean, so Lucas, I'm gonna start moderating for a second, just take control of the screen here, and you guys can see what I'm looking at right now. So I mean, I think Lucas, and I think I think it was in the prompt that I sent to everybody, but in the syllabus there was a little, there was a quote from Alberti, a quote from Venturi, and then a quote from Rhino, McNeil, which said basically described the offset quote. And everybody dealt, I think, with the kind of disciplinary quotes, but I think Lucas is the only project that sort of took on literally that offset definition. And I think that's really, but I think he took it on in a really disciplinary way. And I just want to talk about this for a second, because I think, when you wrote, so Lucas made a component with Python and Rhino script and wrote this out. And I think he did it in like a really critical way. So where he was not necessarily seeking out a kind of formal solution, but thinking about this process critically. And he was able to translate between both his written language in writing in English and then writing in his coding. And I think it was a kind of really critical part in the work. And I think that's another level of offset in the work, right? Which is the kind of offset between your writing in English and your writing in Python, which is also in English, but the kind of translation there. I think that's a really amazing thing to accomplish in a semester, or actually, in a year's worth of research. And it's really, really well executed. I think that the COVID-19 thing interrupted this other parallel part of this process, which was a kind of additive manufacturing, which I think was a really compelling thing that you were looking at, which was really, to answer, Lisa brought this question up about, I think it was Lisa, about the 3D, or somebody brought it up about the 3D. I can't remember. Maybe it was Aaron. I can't remember. Anyway, there were a lot of good comments, so sorry if I'm mixing them up, but the 3D, right? So Lucas, you said, no, I only work 2-dimensionally, and that's kind of not true. You worked with 3-dimensional lines, right? You controlled and scripted lines. And I think that's a really important part of the project. And thinking about those things as tool paths was a moment for you that got cut short by the COVID-19. So I think that's something you could also explore in your future work. I think there's a lot of stuff here for future work. So I just want to say, I want to commend you on a really thoughtful and elegant research project and some really, really beautiful drawings. So congratulations, Lucas. It's been a real pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Mark.
And so, we're at that's the end of our review today. So I just want to thank our critics. I mean, it's really amazing for these students, right? Everyone's all, their semester got cut short, and you guys all came out and gave them some really wonderful feedback on a Sunday. So I'll speak for the students now. I'm sure they greatly appreciate it. I know I greatly appreciate it, to have such a group of critics from all over the place and different schools. So it's really, really wonderful. And the discussion was great. So thank you. And I'll just open up if there's any kind of closing comments anyone would like to make. This is a time to do that. Yeah.
I have a comment. I've been coming to Mark's reviews for a number of years now, and I just want to commend this group in particular. I think that as a group overall, the work is particularly strong. The projects are very well developed. This is not a critique of Mark's earlier projects, but I just want to say that the group, you guys have done a really impressive job. And you did it during what has got to be one of the most strange semesters of my lifetime, and I am much older than you are. So I just want to commend all of you on a very successful project under any circumstances, and particularly under the circumstances that you've been under.
I'd like to jump in and I think echo some of Lisa's comments about how beautiful the drawings are. I think the most interesting aspect for me, as someone who's returning to see some of the work now as faculty at another institution, is the diversity in the production from the cohort, that every single project looked extremely different, even though they were all based off of the same prompt. And just the means of representation, the way that each person looked at the prompt, although there was sort of the singularity of housing that sort of went through a lot of the projects, even that was ancillary to the rest of the work. So I think it was really nice to see the way that each one of you interpreted the prompt, and how some took it literal and some took it extremely abstract. So kudos to all of you, and you finally get to get some sleep and get a break. So definitely take advantage of that.
I want to say a ditto to what Jermaine just said. As another Woodbury alum, and to see all of you and how you like took this in your own way and represented in your own way, even through text. Like some of you, changed your text differently and like called your boards different things or numbered them slightly differently. There was the veteran guy who was like Alpha, Charlie, and Bravo and whatever. Like that was really cool to see like that. Like you took your ideas further than just like the idea in the project, but also how do you represent the idea?
Yeah, I mean, echoing everybody, they're totally gorgeous projects, but also I think the way that you guys presented was so clear and clean and allowed us to really get into some nice conversations throughout these projects. But I also think that what's so exciting about this work is it's definitely thesis work. It's starting to think about how you might think about architecture as you move forward in your career and as a starting point to the future of who you are in the architecture profession. And it's really exciting to see the class that's going out into the world, even in this crazy world.
Yeah, it's a great body of work, particularly considering the circumstances. And I think you guys have all developed fascinating techniques, but so much of architecture is determining how and when and why to deploy certain techniques, and not necessarily always deploying the same technique. So I would encourage you guys to rest, and while resting, really consider what is of value to you, how this could be part of your practice, and how you could build from this to develop your own techniques even further.
Congratulations all. I really enjoyed the work today. This is my first time on a review at Woodbury, and really amazing work and content and conversations today. It's not always the case that I get to geek out over form, representation, and geometry. And so if I sounded overly critical, it's because I'm actually super excited about what you guys are all doing. And so I think that's also great because of the great studio prompt as well. So congrats.
Thanks everybody. Yeah, and Sean, you went to CCA undergrad, right? Did you go to in Bay Area, right? So
yeah,
a little bit of a little further south, but a little bit of a digital homecoming in a way, California. So yeah, so thank you so much, critics. You guys have been really wonderful, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much. So I'll let you guys go now. I wish I could take you out for a drink, but I can't. So whatever. Hopefully I'll catch up with you guys again. I'll send you a note later, but and then students, stick around because I'd like to talk to you. And but I just thanks so much, guys, and I really appreciate you all coming and joining us today. It was really wonderful to have you. So,
Thanks.
but students, do stick around because I want to talk for a second.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
So that one, another good day of reviews, huh?
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I told you
242.
guys not to be nervous.
I'm still sweating, and I'm done.
Yeah, Cherise, thank you for going first. I think you noted that your review, like Jeremiah's, there was a long pause at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very hard to go first. So I put you and Jeremiah both first because I knew, on the one hand, both you could handle the long pause, and two, your projects were accessible enough and clear enough and well drawn enough, to get the people into the work. So I thank you for doing that, because I think you opened up the door discussion to everybody after that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So really good.
Took one for the team.
It's an incredibly hard thing to do, is go first. And I think
Yeah.
you did a really good job at it too. You really presented the studio as much as you presented your own work, and I think I knew you could do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I think everyone did a wonderful job today presenting. I was really impressed. I think doing it twice before was helpful, and I think it was really great. So I'd like. So a couple things. I'd like to catch up. Do you guys have time to catch up tomorrow for a half an hour, just to sort of? I'd like to meet. I'm gonna send you guys a meeting invitation to debrief around 1:15. It's optional. You don't have to come. It's just like I just want to just say hey, talk. Get a little. breather from what happened today, and then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
This is definitely, I have to say, you know, as awkward as the situation is working online, that these 2 days have been the best thesis reviews I've ever had at Woodbury, without exaggeration. Just the level of critics that we've gotten. I don't know Sean. I've never met him. So, but I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's a super accomplished young architect, really, really great at Harvard. I just emailed him and he said, "Great, I'll come." You know, so like, and then yesterday I invited 3 people I didn't know. So it's just, we got some really great people, and you guys really rose to the occasion. So I'm really just so proud of you and impressed, and lucky to have worked with you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank
So
you, Mark.
I'll catch up. And hey, Yixi, are you still here?
No.
It looks like he's on, but he's muted.
Yixi, are you here?
Yeah.
You said yes? Okay. All right. So Yixi, I'm going to send you a Ring Central meeting in about 2 minutes, okay? And I'll catch up with you, okay? But everyone else, I'll talk to you guys 1:15 tomorrow if you want to come. If not, I'll just give you your grades and you can go on with your life. And we do have our Friday event. I haven't sent out the information about that yet, but I think it starts at 3:00 on Friday. And that's going to be the award ceremony. And there's a speaker who Eagle hasn't announced yet, but I think it's somebody very exciting. So I'll let her do that. I don't want to steal her thunder. Okay, so I will talk to you guys on Friday or tomorrow, and then other than that, I'll best of luck. And Yixi, I'll send you a meeting right away. Okay.
Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.